Where does the time go? It's a question that we often ask ourselves, and it's something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently since becoming reacquainted with an old school friend. And I use the word old in a very positive sense, and that's something we can talk about. But yes, 50 years ago, 1973, Peter A and Peter B, that's me. Peter A is Peter Allison. We went to the same school in northeast England, Sedgefield Comprehensive in County Durham. We were there for 7 years, and then we went off in our separate ways in the big wide world. And for most of that time, for several decades, we weren't in touch. But now, I guess thanks to social media and digital technology, we are indeed back in touch. We've been talking online. And Peter, it's good to see you. It's good to talk to you.
And it's great to speak to you too. And yes, where does the time go?
It is a question to ponder, isn't it? And, I am of the kind of mindset that I don't like to think too much about the past and I like to look ahead to the future. But when you have a conversation like this, it does focus the mind, doesn't it?
It does. I work at a university now, and I go on LinkedIn and I look at some of the students I've taught, and I find myself. Maybe you do something. Maybe you do the same thing in your line of business. But I suddenly see like a work anniversary will pop up on LinkedIn, and I'll go, oh look, and I'll just think, oh, it's just a few years since I taught them, and then I'll go and look at their page, and I'll think, it was 10 years ago, or it was 15 years ago. And there are these really interesting memory things, which I find very, when you observe them, you think, that's really interesting how my perception of time has changed. It just doesn't seem very long ago, but then it's a long time.
So I think it might be nice just to delve into a few of those memories. But as I say, it's always good to look to the future. And what we've discovered is that we have this common interest in human longevity and trying to optimize our health as we
Yeah.
move into we're already in our seventh decade. We're both 61 years old now. We were 11 years old then, back in 1973. So we're going to have a few conversations talking about what we're doing to optimize our health, delving into the research. You've been a lifelong academic. You're well used to analyzing data and looking at scientific papers. So it's going to be interesting to get your take on some of the latest science in terms of human longevity. But let's just indulge a little bit and go back to, well, yeah, the 1970s, 1973. We went to Sedgefield together. We were quite similar in many ways. And the one memory that comes flooding back to me is that you and I used to hate playing football. We used to do everything possible to avoid physical education. And we spent a lot of time while the other kids were out playing football, we were playing chess in the school hall, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I think we both hated PE with a passion. There are all sorts of reasons, and I remember that at one point I went and asked the PE teacher if he thought chess was a good idea and would it be okay if we played chess. And so we managed to escape those chess games. I'm not quite sure where all of your listeners are situated, but I recall some of those football matches because our PE teacher had played for a local football team. Our school usually produced a first-class football player about every year or two. And we used to do something called shirts versus skins. And I remember, can you remember that?
Oh, yes. Now that you mention it, yes.
And you'd be out there in your gym shorts and your top, and then your skins, and you might be playing a game of football in the sleet when it was in the middle of December or January, and you'd be playing football, and you'd just think, this is a punishment.
That's how it felt. And, looking back, it probably wasn't a great thing that we were allowed to get away with not doing much physical education. I do remember that one of the options eventually was to go for a long distance run, to do some running as
Yeah.
opposed to playing football, which I actually quite used to enjoy. And years later became a long distance runner and actually during my life did quite a few marathons, which is something that I've always enjoyed. But yes, those school days were tough days. And as you say, the other memory that comes flooding back is, yes, it was the northeast of England. It was freezing cold during the winters. But did you enjoy school generally?
I enjoyed parts of school. I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed just discovering stuff. I loved that part of it, and I just took real delight in learning. Um, I think bullying was a bit more prominent in schools at that time than it is now. I hope that I think there's an improvement. Um, and so there was quite a bit of bullying because you were the person who was interested in learning, and that was sort of to some extent, made school something to be, you had to sort of suffer through it in a way, which was a pity, I think. I don't think young people have that as bad nowadays. I hope. I hope.
I hope you're right. And yeah, I remember that absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that you and I did some of the activities that we did was that we could be inside during playtimes, that we had
Yes.
an excuse to be inside, a little safe room, if you like, inside where we
Yeah.
didn't have to go outside and be exposed to the elements. And yes, you're right. There was quite a bit of bullying at that time. But I see those days in the same way as you, that I enjoyed the learning process a lot, and there were actually some great teachers at our school, and that is always going to be a positive memory.
I think some of those teachers were just fantastic. I mean, I can think we had a teacher who, we had teachers who would run hiking trips to the Lake District. I remember one hiking trip. I can't remember if you were on this trip, but we went there and somebody wanted to introduce us to abseiling. So we found some little cliff in the Lake District. Somebody chucked a rope down and then started showing us how to abseil. And that would probably be a bit more difficult to arrange in schools today. And it's a pity because it just exposed me to, hiking and stuff. And subsequently as a career, I became a geologist. And one of the things I've done as a geologist is I've travelled around to lots of parts of the world, and I've hiked in places, and I've really enjoyed that. And I love that, just being out in the outdoors in a sort of a remote or semi-remote place. And I think that was a real privilege. And we were at a state comprehensive school, but we had teachers organising that. There was another teacher who used to one of these old-fashioned cine projectors, and he was getting 16mm films and trying to expose people to different sorts of film styles. I mean, it was pretty good, really. You used to play music, and there was also some music things, wasn't there? And were you a musician?
Yeah, exactly. I spent a lot of time with the school band. I played several instruments, played the cello, which I didn't really enjoy, and transitioned to playing the clarinet. And that was a big part of my life at school. We travelled, we went on a great trip. I remember to Germany to perform with the band, and we had a lot of concerts. We had a great music teacher who actually I managed to keep in touch with for a little while, and it was a part of my life that I actually wish I'd continued with music in many respects. It's something
Mm,
I didn't keep up. And it's one of those things, as I wonder if you're like this, as you get older and but perhaps have a little bit more time, although time is always a key issue for me. And I feel as if I don't have enough time at the moment. But maybe when that day comes, that music is something that I'd like to actually return to. There are lots of things
yeah.
I've done during the years that you enjoy, but you don't pursue to the level that you feel as if you couldn't get some enjoyment from.
Well, yes, and I think that thinking again as we get older, you think about the ways that we can challenge ourselves, and I think about making sure that trying to ensure that we give ourselves the best opportunity to have active and healthy later years in life. Um, Having something which is a brain tester, either learning a foreign language or playing a music, which are brain tests really, which is exercise the brain. I think that's just as important, and I think I'm currently focused on trying to improve my physical strength, but then equally, I was not very good at learning languages. So my wife and I have had discussions about I'd like to learn Spanish. Um, just looking for something to do to stimulate the brain as we get older.
So you mentioned you became a geologist. You've travelled a lot with your work. You're also a diver. Just give me a little potted history of what Peter Allison has done since the last time we had a conversation, or at least the last time that we met in person, which I think was, and we've discussed this, we think we last met in about 1984 in London.
Yeah, I think it was about then, and I think so. At that at that point, I was working as a journalist, and I was writing market surveys for a trade journal, for a trade magazine. I then decided that I wanted to do a PhD because that was my passion, and I guess I was thinking back to. I remember having conversations with my dad, and my dad was saying, "You've got a job. It's going to be a good, steady job. You're going to getting paid well. That's only going to get better. Why are you going to put all of this at risk by going to do back to school, back to university to do a PhD? You've got 3 years, and you're getting married as well. You know, you've got all of these things going. Why are you doing that?" And I remember a conversation I had with one of the teachers at school who just said you should just there's a time when you've just got to follow your passion, and if this is your passion, follow it and have a shot. And if I was thinking about the risks involved in getting a job at the end of the day at a university, which is what I really wanted to do, good sense would have been don't do it. But I just kept having the dream and kept following the passion, and so I did a PhD. I then had a postdoc in the United States, which was fantastic. I went and worked at the University of Washington lived in a small island called Friday Harbor, which is in the just south of Vancouver Island. And it was just a fantastic place, you know, and it was a great opportunity. And then, so one of the things that's a little bit on my, which is semi-current, is while I was there, I was organising some talks. I got talking to one of the speakers. One of the speakers had just done some work, and he'd been using a submersible to go to a site just off the coast of San Diego, and they were diving in a submersible to a site that was about 1,200 meters deep. And I said, "Oh, I could put a spin on that and get the work, get another publication out of that work with a slightly different spin on it." He said, yeah, for sure. And so off we went, and I went and managed to get a dive down to 1,200 meters, which is, for somebody, you know, I've always had this passion for ecology and just seeing wildlife, and just suddenly to be looking out of a little window and just seeing all of these creatures on the seabed at 1,200 meters was just it was pretty unique, and not many people get to do that. So then I went and worked in Japan for a bit. So anyway, as I was saying to you briefly before, when I lived in America, I put on 14 pounds in weight. I then went and lived in Japan for 9 months, and I lost 14 pounds of weight, which was an interesting lesson. And I then came back with a permanent job, and I worked at the University of Reading for a good while. And that was my first permanent academic position. And then from there, I left Reading, and although I still live in Reading, and then I left Reading to go for a job at Imperial College. So that's where I went. And I've been there ever since. I'm now semi-retired. I think I've enjoyed some of the work I've done. I've enjoyed the fact I've got to see places. I've done field work in rural parts of Mexico, the Canadian Rockies, Utah, jungles of Japan. You know, and you get to see places and just meet people, and it's just really nice. But I think over the years, one of the things I noticed was that when I was younger, I could have periods of inactivity, go away on a field trip, throw a backpack on my back, and my muscles might be a bit sore for the first day or two, but I'm fine. And I could do that when I was in my 20s. And then it got to the point where you can't do that as you get older. As I realized as I got older, I just couldn't do that. So I started there was this realization that my body, and I just didn't even, you don't even think about that process happening. But then you suddenly get to a point. And I think in part, I just assumed that this was just aging and this is just the way it was going to be. And then I just was reading something, and it was saying this is all correctable. You can correct this. You can do something about it. And I found that was great. It's hard work to do something about it. But, you know, as I moved to being semi-retired, having something like a project which is hard. It helps me move into retirement mode. So it helps my head as well as my body, right? Because it helps give me a focus and a challenge, which, we both people who want focuses and want challenges, right? So that's so you get a new challenge. And the other thing I've always done is I've always had my weight at school. There was the bullying at school was about my weight. Somehow or other, I recently was talking to somebody or I saw an advert for a new dramatization of The Lord of the Flies. Can you remember doing Lord of the Flies at school?
Oh, yes, definitely.
When we were doing Lord of the Flies at school, as I read it, as I was reading it, I just thought, oh, this is going to make my life hell. Because instantly I became the piggy character. And then, like anybody who's interested in reading, you sort of like read the rest of the story. And then you get to the end and you think, well, I know what happens to Piggy in the story, right? So, this doesn't end well. So I've always had this problem with weight. And I guess I've yo-yoed so my weight I've been in the overweight category. So I've yo-yoed from being just into the normal weight category to being into the overweight category. And so that's something I've had as a challenge. And as I've got older, then you get sort of muscle weakness and muscle loss as well. So that's a challenge to try and beat. But, these challenges, as I've said before, moving into retirement, having challenges is good.
Yeah, I agree with you. Totally good. And I think that is where we see the world in the same way. And moving forward with this, I think what we are hoping to do is have lots of conversations based around those topics, but looking forward, looking at the science, especially. There's a couple of recent papers today that we're going to talk about in terms of interventions that could potentially help us live longer and better. And I prefer using that kind of phrase, living longer and better. This isn't about eternal life. This isn't about living forever, unrealistic dreams, interesting though that is. This is about living to 80, 90 or 100 and as being as healthy physically and mentally as we possibly can, and able to do the things that we want to do now, and maybe be able to do the things that we were doing 30 or 40 years ago. And so the question is, where on earth do we start with all of that? And I think a good place to start is weight, which I've battled the same kind of things. My weight has yo-yoed, not to an extreme level, not to an extremely high level. I don't think I've ever gone. I live in America now. I just refer to weight in terms of pounds. I don't talk about kilos and I don't talk about stones. So bear with me. But roughly maybe 195 to 200 pounds has been my maximum. I'm now actually a pretty good low 170s, I think 172, 173, which I'm reasonably happy with. Being just under 6 foot tall, 5'11", I think it is pretty reasonable for me. But there has been that yo-yo in my life that you've experienced as well. And one of the most interesting things that I've been dabbling with is fasting, intermittent fasting, periodic fasting, fasting mimicking diets, which are well documented on this podcast. What kind of interventions have you been looking at?
So I view these weight loss challenges that I've had, I view them as campaigns. My first campaign was just based upon exercise and calorie restriction, and that worked. And then over a period of years, I put on about half of what I'd lost. So it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So I was happy with that because I'm still 1 step ahead. So that was good. I then started playing around with the famine diets. And the first time I did it was fine. Second time it was okay. But I think that what I was doing is I tried to I suspect I was doing lots of cardio exercise on my famine days. And so I lost a lot of muscle in my upper body. And whether that was because I was doing cardio at the same time as the famine, or whether it was just natural muscle wastage, I don't know. But I realized I had lost a lot of muscle. And it just suddenly, and it's one of those things that you suddenly discover when you just go to pick something up and you just think, 15 years ago, I would have done that without any problem. And now I'm straining, and now I'm getting all these aches and pains. So that's then what prompted me to go actually to start hitting the gym. Really, I mean, it was a. I mean, in part, during the COVID lockdowns, I was doing a lot of exercise on a cross trainer, on an elliptical, and my machine broke. And I decided rather than buying a new machine, I would just go and get a gym membership because I get to use different machines. And then I decided to do the weights. And I would have, do you know, if you'd spoke to me 20, 30 years ago and said, will you be one of those blokes who goes to the gym and starts moving weights, I would have laughed at you at the mere prospect of such a thing. But, you know, I go there and I go to a gym and there are just all sorts of people with all sorts of body shapes who are all trying to do the same thing. And everyone is civil to each other. It's not, you know, so if anybody's thinking about going to the gym, certainly in the gym I go to, there's no judgment.
No judgment.
For anyone.
Exactly. And that's the way it should be. And I think it's interesting that you've come to this realization, which I and many other people do as they grow older, that resistance training and weightlifting is so crucial, that you can do as much jogging and running around the block and doing half marathons as you like. But it actually doesn't do you as much good as consistently, several times a week, challenging yourself and lifting weights and increasing your muscle mass, in other words, increasing your strength, and reducing the likelihood that you become frail in later life.
Yeah.
And frailty is, as I think we all know, is one of the biggest killers. That can be the beginning of the end when you have a fall that reduces from being frail because you can't balance yourself, you can't stand up if you feel yourself wobbling. And that can be a really serious beginning of that downhill trend towards really ill health, getting to a point where you can't exercise, don't want to exercise. And I think that's when a lot of people just give up.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking personally, I can say that I was starting to get aches and pains all over myself, all over my body, which I just thought were normal aging. And in hindsight, it was muscle loss leading to my body moving in ways that was probably causing ligaments damage, probably, and getting all sorts of little aches and pains that have just vanished. I just don't have them anymore. And I know from the papers I've read, I know that doing the resistance training, it leads to an increase in bone mass. The positives are just really huge, right? So and I'm amazed that even a man of my age is able to do this and is able to shift it. And so I'm doing more press ups now than I could have done. Having said that, going back to it in the 1970s, I couldn't do any. But I'm not doing as many as I'd like, but I'm doing more, and it's fun. It is fun.
It is fun, and it's invigorating when you begin to see results.
It is invigorating to see results, and I think one of my hobbies, one of my passions is diving. If I'm diving in the UK, and depending on what I'm doing, my kit can be very heavy. So it may be under some circumstances that all the kit I've got to put on is 80 kilos in weight. So I've got my body weight and I've got another 80 kilos, and then I'm walking across the deck of a boat with fins on, and the boat might be tossing and turning. And potentially you worry about what happens if I fall. Might I hurt somebody else if I fall on them because I've got a lot of metal on my back, for example? So part of it is about being able to, at least part of that was, I have to find all sorts of tricks to make me do things. I have to build up this logical framework of saying, I'm doing this because. And one of it is I'd like to be doing a deep technical dive to 70 meters on my 70th birthday, which means the full 80 kilos of stuff. And if I'm going to be doing that, well, I have to make sure that my body can handle that part. So this is my little trick. Whether I do that at age 70 or not, it doesn't really matter. I'm just telling myself this is the target. So it's just one of my little tricks. I'm sure we all have tricks. You must have tricks as well to make yourself do things.
All the time. And I look forward to our conversation the day after your 70th birthday when you can tell me how it all went. So you mentioned scientific papers just now, and what we're going to do in these conversations over the coming weeks and months, maybe even years, hopefully, Peter, is to talk about the latest research as we see it, as it is published. And there was one this week in the journal Science about taurine, which is a nutrient that we find in meat, in fish, especially. Interesting research that it extends life, at least in the research involving, yes, animals, but not humans. That research is still to be done.
Okay, so it's a really neat paper. And just to say that Science is one of the top 2 journals for any scientist to publish in. This is a multi-authored paper with over 50 authors from all around the world. So going through the review process will be very rigorous. So this is high quality work. And they've connected a number of points. And one of the points is it's noted that taurine levels in younger people is much higher, and as we age, the amount of taurine in our bodies gradually falls away. It gets to be about 20% of what it is in younger people. In younger people, by the time we were in our old age, this is associated with, this reduction in the amount of taurine in our bodies is associated with all sorts of the markers of age, whether or not we're looking at the way that our DNA is wrapped up or whatever. So it's associated with a whole bunch of things. And so what they've done is they did some experiments on mice. And when they gave the mice some taurine, they found that the indicators of age, the health indicators, improved, and they found that some of the mice lived for up to 20% longer. So they had longer lives. They didn't just stop at mice, so they did some work on monkeys as well. They also did some work on worms, and when they treated the worms with taurine, there was also an improvement in the worms. They tried some more primitive organisms, some single-cell critters. Doesn't work on yeast, but seems to work on a range of multicellular critters. But the important thing to note here for anybody listening is the dosage of taurine that was being delivered. So the dosage was around about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So for somebody like me, that would mean 75 grams, which I can't convert that to ounces. But, we're talking about over the course of a week, maybe a pound of taurine. So that's a huge amount for a human to consume. And of course, then the other side of things is there's always the potential, because our bodies are very, very complex, chemical engineering factories, really. That's where our bodies are. There are all sorts of complex things going on. If we suddenly take in something that is perhaps not right, then something else might start going wrong. So that's why human trials are required for, and potentially ultimately gearing up to a larger group. But it's really, really exciting work.
It's interesting. And of course, one of the reasons this caused a flurry of excitement is that taurine is a component of many energy drinks.
Yes.
And I think there was an initial thinking by some people was, wow, all these energy drinks that I actually thought that people think they're great for me because it gives me an energy boost, but maybe at the back of their mind also know that energy drinks aren't necessarily good for us, consumed in large quantities. But the point about dosage is the real cautionary tale here, isn't it?
Yes, it is, isn't it? I mean, I think dosage is the real issue, and I think in terms of a concern. So, for example, I was eating some scallops. I ate quite a lot of scallops one day last week, and the scallops that I ate probably had scallops. I think as a foodstuff, they've got more taurine in than any other foodstuff that you can buy. They're one of the richest sources of taurine that you can have in the human diet. And I probably consumed 6 or 7 grams of taurine within these scallops. So I had a high dosage, and one could argue that was naturally. I was maybe being a bit of a pig eating so many scallops. But it would be difficult to think of what the questions would be: is taking dosages that high in a human being with a very complex biochemistries that we have, what that might do. So that's the next question to be answered, really, and just what the right dosages would be.
The other study that caught my eye and the eyes of lots of people this week was to do with napping, sleeping during the day. Getting 40 winks in the middle of the afternoon could also help us extend our lives. And this is all to do, isn't it, with the size of our brains, and really fascinating work.
Oh, this is fascinating work, and it comes out of something called the biobank study. And this is something that my wife and I were both part of the biobank study some years back. And there is something like 500,000 people who've been submitting themselves to the biobank study. They get they contribute various data sources, which ultimately goes into this big data set that is then being mined for health information. So the really interesting things is first of all, they've recognized a gene that makes people more likely, or a set of genes that makes people more likely to nap. And if you have that gene set, and if you do have a nap, then over the course of time, it suggests that your brain may shrink less if you're having these naps, so you get less brain shrinkage. And the important thing about brain shrinkage is associated with some of the deterioration of the brain that we normally expect with age. So if you regularly nap, this could be the equivalent of 4 or 5 years or something like that, or the equivalent of brain deterioration. So you might stave that off. However, what they did also note, their experiments were also included things on measures, on various cognition measures, and it didn't improve the cognition performance. It improved the size of the brain, but not the cognition performance, which is interesting. And the authors highlight this, and they just say this is not what we expected. I mean, I must admit, I've got some skin in the game here, because I am the sort of person, I grew up in a family where everyone would have a nap after a meal. So napping for me and my family, I remember when my wife first came to stay with my mum and dad, she suddenly saw everyone we had a Sunday dinner, and then washing up's done, and everybody just sits down and has a sleep in the chairs. My wife was looking around going, well, what's going on here? Everyone just goes for a sleep for 20, 30 minutes. So I think this is great research, because it shows that me having a nap is a really good idea, which means I can continue to have naps.
Well, that was the bit of the research that I focused in on, our likelihood, our sort of genetic likelihood to want to have a nap, because I'm one of those people who doesn't nap. I've never napped. I've never felt, I can feel tired, but I don't take it to the point that the solution to that is to take a nap. In fact, if I do, on very rare occasions when I've worked all night for some reason and I'm super tired and I do fall asleep during the day, it affects my sleep the next night, and I just can't get to sleep at 11 o'clock midnight that night. So I'd rather just go without the nap. But it isn't within my psyche to want to take a nap, and never has been. I remember my dad often used to have a nap after, as you describe, after lunch, but other members of my family never do that. And that's what's interesting to me, how we are pre-programmed to want to nap or not to nap.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? There's just the impact of all of these subtle genetic differences which predisposed us to certain sorts of behaviour. In terms of thinking about sleep, and for example, I'm sure we've all been to a dinner party where we've been sitting around and the host comes out and starts offering people, espressos or whatever. And we all know somebody who can be happily drinking espresso at 8 o'clock at night and then have no difficulty going to bed at 10. Me, if I have a cup of coffee after noon, after 12 o'clock midday, then I'm probably not going to be sleeping that night. For me, my last cup of coffee is about 8 o'clock in the morning, and then I stop. And so there is obviously different sensibilities and sensitivities to these external stimuli that we take. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing and it's fascinating. And there's another similarity then between me and you, because I can't drink coffee in the afternoon as well. And I guess as we continue these conversations, coffee might be something that we'll return to, because caffeine as an issue is hugely fascinating to me. I recently gave up coffee for a few weeks, and we'll delve into this on another occasion, Peter. But I think it is a key part of growing old, of how we expose ourselves to these external stimulants and the knock-on effect, and how it affects our daily lives, how it affects the circadian rhythm, how it affects our digestion, the microbiome. It's all kind of linked, and it's all really interesting. Peter, it's been really good, really good to catch up with you and to have this conversation. And I would like to do it on a regular basis, because I think one of the ways of all of us benefiting from this research at a lay level. I'm not talking about a scientific academic level. I mean, all the information is out there. But for, I think, people to benefit from science, it needs to be talked about, and it needs to be understood, and it needs to be digested, it needs to be torn apart, and the little caveats understood, and the cautionary tales that we can learn from this research needs to be discussed at a level that we can all get it, and it can all be relevant in terms of information to our everyday lives. So I think this is really valuable. Really good to catch up with you, and we'll talk soon, hopefully.
And great to speak to you as well, Peter.